welcome back to Algolia Search Party. So this is Matt from Netlify, and I have an intro as well, don't worry. So Matt is the CEO at Netlify. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me okay? Louder noises. Okay, so we're really happy that Matt came to join us today because he's a very busy man this week because they just raised a $12 million Series A round. Really awesome. So we're really happy that Matt's here. Matt's kind of a big deal. He's very highly engaged in his community and likes to keep things like his name a mystery on Twitter. With an array of object, which was super fun for me to try and figure out. And then some fun facts. He went to musical theory and started his career as a musical journalist in Denmark to kind of kick things off. So we're hoping that maybe he'll drop some music knowledge on us later, which is really kind of a fun thing. And that's my fun fact. And then from here, we're looking forward to hearing him talk about like integrating CMSs with Algolia and React, I believe. Yeah. And with that, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. So, thanks for having me here. And I'll be talking about CMSs without any server and sort of the model of architecture for the web that we're working to further at Netlify. I always get like a little skeptical when I hear the word serverless because I guess I'm a little traumatized from running a company where we have to deal with like hundreds of servers across something like 30 different data centers every day. But it is true that what we are all building here is kind of an architecture that allows developers to work without thinking of servers as an abstraction and part of their work, right? And I think that's very powerful, simply the concept of letting people build global applications or sites with a very high degree of performance and scalability without ever having to consider the actual distribution of hardwares and operating systems and installation processes and load balancing and all of that that some of us have to deal with at some level of the stack eventually. So Netlify is an automation platform for the modern web. We essentially built the whole tool belt that a web developer needs to work with websites application where the front end is strictly decoupled from the back end. So when we talk about this sort of category, I've been using this kind of diagram a couple of times, where back in the really old days of computing, we had this client-server model where you would like terminal your way into some big workstation and then your client would send commands back and forth. And then when the web came up, we started building this whole web architecture that we've been working with for the last 15 years, and that's done amazing things for us. Where a client will talk to a web server, and a web server will talk to an app server, and the app server will talk to a database, and we have these big monolithic applications that will tend to run in one database, often like in one data center, often across multiple servers, but it'll be like in one big blob of things that runs every time you visit that site. And what we're seeing now with companies like my own and Algolia and Firebase and Auth0 is this movement to loading a client directly from a content delivery network and then having your browser talk not to one server but to many different services. That's great, and it gives so many benefits in terms of performance, in terms of the cleanness of the architecture and so on. But it can also mean that we have to deal suddenly with a lot of different parts, like your continuous deployment system, your CDN, your object store, all these different microservices that you have to find and talk to, all the glue you need to tie all of those together. And what we're trying to do with Netlify is simply to take the hassle away from that and just give the tool set that makes it all a very coherent platform to work with as a developer. So this is my Netlify and the projects I have access to and I'm working to. I can sort of have access to different teams where I can build different projects and so on. And I'm going to create a new site right now So the idea with Netlify is that you can push to Netlify in many ways, but typically you want to have a project in one of the main Git providers like GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, and then just link it to Netlify. So I have like a simple documentation site here. You'll see that in many cases when you pick a repository, Netlify looks at that repository and just guess what settings you would want to use to build that repository. In this case, we're building a site based on a static site generator called Hugo. How many here knows Hugo? So not a lot of people. It's a very cool project. So Hugo is a site generator built in Go. It's basically a tool that takes a folder with templates and content. The content will tend to be like in Markdown or YAML files or TOML files. And then it will take like your folder of templates and layouts and so on, combine that with your content and spit out a website from the two parts. And the cool thing with it is that since it's written in Go, it's very high performant. So in some examples that we've seen, we've been able to build like 6,000 HTML pages in 5 seconds with this kind of tool. So this is like a small one of their themes called DocDoc that I'll hook up to a small documentation site. And when I click this little deploy button, what's happening below the scene is that Netlify now set up a whole continuous deployment flow. So this is something that like a few years ago, you would have like a large DevOps team work for months to set up like a continuous deployment flow. This was all it took. It's already done, right? So the site is live. And now I've set up like a continuous deployment flow for this Hugo site where every time I push to Git, we'll build the site and we'll push it to a custom content delivery network with servers across 6 different cloud providers in more than 30 different data centers around the world. So I'll go in here and give it a name so we have a better URL for it. And here's my new little Jamstack website. So if I go to the other end of things, like, so this is the Netlify UI. If I go to the other Netlify thing, other end of things, here's the GitHub repository that I just linked to. And I'll try to make things a little bigger. And you'll see this could be like there's a ton of different static site generators. We built like an open source index called StaticGen, where you can follow like the evolution of a ton of them. And they all have their way of structuring content and so on. Hugo has like a concept of layout and a static folder and themes, and then a content folder where your actual website content lives separated from the design of your site. So here you'll see there's like a folder called Jamstack Sites with a bit of like an article called Automation and one called No Backend. There's a little header and there's an index. And if we look at this index file and we go to edit mode so we can see the raw details, you'll see like a very typical pattern for all of these tools, that you have a little front matter with some metadata, and you can essentially stuff any kind of metadata in there, and then a markdown body for the main document. Now I'm gonna make a little change here to try to make this site a little more amazing. And we're gonna create a new pull request for this. Obviously this you would normally do in your text editor or whatever, right? But it's just like a really common workflow to make pull requests, submit pull requests, and as developers, that's like our favorite way of working, right? Like we just work through GitHub, we work with branches, we work with pull requests. You'll see like now, since I started this pull request, Netlify immediately picks it up, and we built this pull request. So now we have a version of the site that that tells us like, if we view the site as it would look like in this pull request, this is how it would be, right? Like now it's called an amazing documentation site, and we have like the whole site here. I made a branch, right, while I was doing this called amazing. So if I go into Netlify, I'll see that I now have an option to go in and start a split test. So Netlify is right now serving like the main version of the site, but I can go in here and say, okay, let's start splitting the traffic between these two branches 50-50. And now if I go to the site, and we're a little lucky because it's 50-50, right? So you never know what version I'll get. Here I got an amazing documentation site. Let's try an incognito window. Here I got a typical documentation site, right? And this happens directly at the CDN edge nodes, right? So it happens like all over the world and instantly. There's no performance loss associated with this at all, and you can use it for like feature rollouts or split testing or whatever you want. So this is all like something that as developers we tend to get and we tend to be really, really fond of. But one of the things that then often happen is that as developers we go to our content team or our marketing team and we start talking about like how awesome it is to work in GitHub and do pull requests and make branches and stuff. And then the enthusiasm for some reason is not like reciprocated. It's it's a very different kind of reaction where it's like, yeah, that sounds really scary and weird. Why are you doing this to me? So this is something that we've started to work on solving with a completely open source project called Netlify CMS. It's not tied in itself to our automation platform. It works really well with it, but it's a self-standing open source project that aims to bring a normal CMS workflow to these kind of Git-centric projects. So I made another version of this site with the CMS and deployed it to Netlify, right? And if I go in and look at the same site here, the same documentation site, and I then go to /admin, then I get this CMS-like UI where I can see the different pages, the different articles, and so on. And I can go in here and I can make edits with like a real-time preview. The whole CMS is built as a single-page app in React, so it's completely client-side. There's not really a server part to this either, right? Like it just lives in your browser, and what it does is that it talks to GitHub's data API. So if I go in and let's create a new doc, and just call it a new page, and I'll click save. Now, the interesting thing when I do that is that in here, in my Git repository, like this was just like a typical content editor operation, right? I went in and saved my post. But in GitHub as a developer, I now see a new pull request called create docs, a new page. And if I go in and look at the pull request, I'll see that Netlify already built the deploy preview of this pull request, right? So I can go in and check how will my site look like. Okay, if I publish this, I'll have this new page. Obviously I could merge it in, but as a content editor, I can also use this editorial workflow Trello-like system where I can say, okay, let's publish this. And again, what this will do behind the scenes is to merge in the pull request we just created through the CMS and create a new master branch. And again, since Netlify is following all of these changes, we'll see a new deploy starting, and in a few seconds, we'll have a new version of the site live. Again, running as a purely static front end distributed on a CDN across all of the world, right? But with a content editing workflow that seems like very familiar to any normal content editor, and it also seems super familiar to any developer, right? Because when you look at this from the developer side, it looks like your content team is suddenly just making commits in GitHub and building things. So this is like a really simple site built in this way. Here's an example we've been working on for a while and that we're working on together with Smashing Magazine. So Smashing Magazine is working, how many here know Smashing Magazine? Quite a few, yeah. So they're one of the largest publications around the front-end design and front-end development. And they're working on building, like they've been based on WordPress for the last 10 years. Actually WordPress and Shopify and Ruby on Rails and Kirby in a big interesting mixture. and they're in the process now of launching a whole new version of Smashing Magazine that you can that's in public beta under next.smashingmagazine.com. built with Hugo. So every time they publish a new article, Hugo will spit out all the content pages in a very short time. And then combining this with Preact in the browser, which is like a really lightweight option of React to give them advanced features like e-commerce and ticket sales and all of that, built with this architecture where you have a client that lives directly on a content delivery network, loads extremely fastly, and then you talk to different microservices like authentication and e-commerce and Algolia for search. If I go here to /admin, and I happen to be logged in, so I get access in a moment if the Wi-Fi wants it, or maybe I don't. Okay, have to. Okay, here we go. So now I logged in. And here's all of Smashing Magazine's articles loaded from the GitHub repo. Now, one of the things that happens here is that in the CMS for my small documentation side, the repo is small enough that I can just like fetch all the articles from GitHub through their API client side and navigate through them and browse them and so on. In Smashing case, we're talking thousands of articles of all different kinds, right? So doing that would take very long and make it very slow. So Netlify CMS has this concept of extension layers where you can hook in, where you can sort of trigger hooks that could, for example, call other services. So one of the things we did for Smashing is to build in a hook that triggers Algolia Search. So if I search here, it actually searches through Algolia inside the CMS and will give me the right piece of content so that I can work on and write on. And it also actually uses the Algolia index for all the listings and so on of the different content types, which makes it like actually very, very performant and easy to work with. And this is also an example of like really taking quite a large site and giving up the concept of having this binary database where you store everything in blobs and just having everything in your Git repository as structured content and having this layer of tooling on top that means that people can work with that content without having to touch code. But the developers still get the full benefit of just working with a completely developer native workflow on top of GitHub with pull requests and branches and all of that. So that was like a really brief overview of Netlify's automation system and our open source CMS. We have a lot of other tools in the space as well, but check this out, and we are always looking for people to contribute and collaborate with. So if this is something you find fun or exciting, then ping us or join our GitHub channel at github.in/Netlify and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so since we've had lots of technical issues, I'm going to have questions for Matt afterwards. And once he tells me that you've answered a question, then I'll give you a fidget spinner. Or you can give. Can I trust you with 3 fidget spinners? To give them out.
I don't know.
All right.
It sounds very risky.
Yes, but we will get it all sorted. So that way I'm going to bring your laptop
good.
up, and then we want to give you guys maximum time to network and drink. So I'm doing this for you. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.